NaNoWriMo starts in November, and if you are participating in NaNoWriMo, we absolutely invite you to the library. We have a space and plugins and a silent room. But if it is not silent, tell us and we will keep it silent. NaNoWriMo is just all the month of November. So if you want to work on your novel during National Novel Writing Month, you are more than invited to the library to use our facilities here. Thank you all so much for coming. Enjoy.
I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So I hope you are here because you want to find out more information about how on earth do I write a novel in 1 month? Because that sounds like a giant, giant hurdle to go over, doesn't it? Well, the reason I'm doing this workshop is because I've actually done this 3 times. And for me, I'll tell you what happened. I started about 2 weeks before November 1st going, I know what novel I'm going to write. And this is when I switched from writing freelance to wanting to be a novelist, right? And I thought, I know what I've got to do. I had a really good idea in my head what I wanted to do. And so 2 weeks before, I thought, okay, I'm going to do all my research. I've got 2 weeks to do my research. And you're laughing. Yeah, November 1st came and I went, I have so much more research to do than I ever thought I would need to do. And so what happened with me is I researched all through November and all through December. My NaNoWriMo, my novel writing month became January. And for me, it fit like a glove. January was perfect. There were no holidays, no interruptions, nothing happened. So I do want to encourage you from the get-go. If by the time we're done today, I presented you with more stuff than you thought that you needed to be prepared to do this, November does not have to be your NaNoWriMo. It does not have to be the month, because it's perfectly fine to pick a different month, but it's all in the preparation. In fact, October is called Preptober because it's all about preparing for that November 1st thing to take off. So by the end of the day, hopefully you will see what things do I need to prepare ahead of time for so that I will be successful in my 30 days ablaze in your creative cauldron, right? And then you'll be able to make that decision yourself. And so what I did was I wrote in 2015, January, I wrote a novel. I wrote a novel January 2016, another one 2017. So every year, January is the absolute best year for me. Writing a novel in a month fits like a glove for me. I enjoyed it immensely. It was wonderful. I'm going to be sharing with you a lot of the things that I learned and that I had to change as I continued doing my writing in 1 month. And I'm also going to use some things from the NaNoWriMo website. I'm going to pull some things from there so you will also get an idea of what's on that website and see if you want to go in there and look, because there's a whole lot of different ways to attack this thing. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So whether you're character-driven or plot-driven, whether you're a pantser or a plotter, we're going to have something good for you today. How many of you are Scrivener users? Scrivener is a novel writing software program, and a lot of people use it. I happen to be a historical novelist, so I have a lot of friends that have used it for their research portion, and then they go ahead and then they write their novel in Word. And I have not yet done the writing and compiling in Scrivener, but I've done everything else in Scrivener. But it's a whole different, it has a learning curve. You don't want to start it right now if you're going to write a novel really soon. I do have some things that I can show you that I've done and some other tips. And there will be some tips probably that I will not go over that will be a slide for. Are there any questions before we get going? It's going to be a lot of information if you would like to find out when I've got other workshops coming up. And also, I include writing opportunities. How many of you do freelance where you make money writing? Okay, well, maybe through some of my links you will decide that you'd like to write some articles or short stories that you can get paid for. I'm a retired high school teacher and I love teaching, and that's why I'm doing this, because I am basically a professional teacher turned professional writer, and I started out making money doing freelance once I quit teaching, and then I went from freelance to book writing. I have 5 literature awards under my belt. I got 2 of them in the last 2 months. And those are all for the pre-published category, because I'm one of those people that's holding out for a big 5 publisher, and that is a process, a journey that takes 2 or 3 or 4 or even 10 years. So that's kind of where I'm at. I want to tell you the reason I like writing my novel in a month is because I just want to get it done. I just want to get it done. You cannot edit a blank page. So if you can write that novel in a month, you're going to spend the next several months editing it and going through it a dozen times, and then you're going to show it to a critique partner. And then you're going to go back and edit it again and again. Then you're going to have a beta reader read it. Then you're going to edit it again. So it's a real muddy process you go through, but you've got to get it written down first. So that's what we're going to be talking about. This is a screenshot from the NaNoWriMo website. And you can see here they have all kinds of helps how you can, if you want to participate, you can do it as much as you want to. You could just go in and use the resources to help you learn some things. There's a course outline. You could actually take this course, and you can see the 5 points there: develop story idea, create complex characters, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they've got some really good ideas for you, especially organizationally speaking. And you can download the complete Nano prep book if you want to, the handbook, to help you. And if this is your very first time doing it, I suggest getting all the help you can possibly read on. This is also the NaNoWriMo Facebook page. So if you're a Facebook user and you like that interaction with other people doing the same thing you're doing during the month of November, then you could easily join them, ask to join them, and you'll probably get a lot of good help. So if you have a question, you can ask it. Every year, thousands of writers launch into yet another novel creation without understanding some basic elements. They're having so much fun writing that they're willing to ignore what every good publishable novel possesses. And that's why I'm doing this, because I have talked to so many people who they've written a novel halfway or partway. Or yes, I've written 5 novels. I've started 5 novels is what they mean. I've talked to people who said, well, I've written 4 novels, but I always write myself into a corner. Sometimes people start writing a novel and they discover that they only have enough content for a short story. They get to 30,000 words and they've already written, beginning to end, what their story is. This is going to be preparing you to look at the big picture to see if you are truly ready to write a novel and what is it that you need to do to prepare to get to that place. The point of view I'm teaching from basically is, I told you before, my own experience, what came hard learned, and what did I pick up from other people, other novelists that was really good advice. I want every ounce of your effort to be effective. Some of the things you need to get right, straight off, charging out of the gate, is what we're going to go through. So this first section, ready, we're going to talk about story arc and plotting, arc details, hooks, and ending. So let's first look at this. NaNoWriMo, the website, has it distilled down into 5 steps, the story arc. This is what you need to ask yourself. What in this is this novel about? Now, as you go through here, you think about your own novel. And I hope that maybe you will take away from here today to do some homework, to really apply these things and think about your novel. What is the story about in 20 words or less? Ask yourself, what if? For example, I'm going to be using The Wizard of Oz here. What if a sweet farm girl wishes for a more exciting life and finds it when she's whisked away to a fantasy world? So that would be the first question. What is the novel about? The second one, what are the stakes? If your hero fails, what will happen? What do the world and your characters have to lose if this story ends in tragedy? And if this story ended in tragedy, what would it look like? So for The Wizard of Oz, what are the stakes? The farm girl could end up trapped in a strange world forever. Okay, that's a second point to understand about your story. The third one, what is the core conflict? Think about it as X versus Y, or your protagonist versus what? The antagonist, or him or herself. Who or what keeps the protagonist from achieving success? It might be an individual, it might be a group, it might be a situation, or an internal struggle, or something else. And in the core conflict of the story, what are the opposing sides. So sometimes we just have the meat and potatoes of the story. We're not dissecting it and thinking about these important elements. The core conflict in The Wizard of Oz. Externally, in the story, as it moves forward, the farm girl versus the wicked witch. But internally, for the protagonist, it's the farm girl versus her own insecurity. Remember, Dorothy was always like, what if? She was always fussing, wasn't she? Right? She was always just dealing with her own insecurities about everything. Our fourth point, how is the conflict resolved? Does the protagonist fail or does the protagonist succeed? And when the stakes, do they come to pass? When they do come to pass, what happens? Let's look at this, the conflict resolved. The farm girl helps everyone achieve their dreams and gets back home with her own power. Okay, so for The Wizard of Oz, that's what that would be. Now, our final question you need to ask about your story is, what is the lesson? Conflict creates change. A novel is the story of change throughout conflict. What is the transformation that occurs through the course of your novel and comes to fruition through the application of the core conflict? Your character needs to change. Their situation needs to change. The story is about change, and conflict happens through change. So think, what is the moral of your story? What will the main character learn, and what transformation will they undergo? For The Wizard of Oz, the lesson is, the farm girl learns that she is powerful and that there's no place like home. So you should be able to answer those 5 questions and ask yourself, do I have all of the elements in my story? Because it's almost impossible to go back and add these kinds of things. And if you're a Scrivener user, of course, there's this good story map on there. But you need to take that story map and look at it and say, does it match with my story arc and these important questions? This distillation that we just went through is very basic, and without more information, you may have trouble keeping your readers engaged in an 80 to 100,000 word novel. So let's talk about another story arc technique. How many of you were here for my Introduction to Publication workshop? It was an all-day thing. Only 2 of you. You're going to get a little bit of repeat here on a couple items because I'm trying to introduce to you the things that are hard to fix once you've written your story. There are 4 elements essential to a good story arc. We're going to talk about those in a minute. Write your novel in a month. That book is up here, and I've used it a lot. You can always tell when I have my books marked up. A thoroughly engaging novel covereth a multitude of fiction sins. It is, in the final analysis, the only thing that matters about your novel. Now, most of my workshops deal with the writing craft. You need to have the craft, and you need to have what we're talking about today, the story arc that makes you have an engaging novel. The reason he says that engaging novel covereth a multitude of fiction sins is because you could have the best writing, but if you don't have an engaging story, nobody's going to buy it. Nobody's going to want to read it. They might read your first book and not want to read their second book because they had trouble making themselves turn the page. So the priority here is you've got to have an engaging novel and then hopefully good enough craft that people enjoy it. They enjoy the writing as much as they enjoy the story. All right, so that's what we're talking about. You can't go back and change your story arc and what's happening. So let's talk about the elements that we need to get right first. We have to have plot. The plot forces your main character to go through his inner journey. Character, the different characters, and there's a great debate whether character is more important or plot, but I just talked to you about the plot. The plot is very important, but if your characters are not engaging enough, we can't relate to them. And that makes for a not enjoyable situation. Core idea, that incredible idea that fires your creative juices like nobody's business. What is the core idea of your story? And then you have the premise. The single largest component is what makes people want to read your story. So those are the things that we need to have in place, and we need to know what they're there for and what they accomplish. Your story will have a structure, whether you consciously choose one or not. Keep in mind, however, that most novels written by the seat of the pants end up feeling random and unfocused to readers. So even if you're a pantser, I really encourage you to have a basic, this is going to happen, and then this has to happen, and then this has to happen. Even if you're a pantser and you're right by the seat of your pants going from this point to this point to this point, okay, you still need some kind of a structure in there. So we're going to be talking real quickly about the 3-act structure. Since the plot is the mechanism you, the author, use to make your character notice and wrestle with his issues, you need to present the plot in the form of story. The plot is the stage upon which your hero undergoes his inner journey. So think about that. The plot is the stage. So if you're watching a presentation, you're sitting in an auditorium and here's the stage and there's a play going on. The stage is the plot. It's always there. And whatever happens, you will know that that plot is there and what's going on. The story is played out by the characters on the stage. So the story is the playing out of the plot. The plot is all important. If we took away the stage, the characters would have no reason to be there, would they? Okay? Whatever your person is dealing with, your protagonist, whatever they're dealing with on the inside is what the plot is about thematically on the outside. They parallel each other. So that's why we're talking about the 3-act structure. As you look at this, Act 1 through Act 3, that's from this Write Your Novel in a Month. There's also 4-act structures available. All you have to do is Google it, and you'll find this all over the place. And they're not all identical, but this is the one that I use when I do it. Let's just talk about this a minute. In the first part of your book, Act 1, we have what's going on the inside of your character. And this is what's going on in the story. So we need to have all of these things reflected on the inside. So in your first chapter or 2, you're going to introduce to us the villain and the ticking time bomb. You're going to introduce to us all the main characters and the initial condition. Because if you don't show us what normal is for your character, we are never going to know how they change from the beginning of that book to the end of the book. So we need to see their initial condition. And then we need to see what the problem is. Because there needs to be a problem. We don't just have once upon a time and we follow somebody through. We need to have a problem that they need to solve and overcome. And that's what your story is going to center around and pull apart. We need an inciting event. We need something that's going to make that character make a decision. Okay, something is going to, the home burns down and all of a sudden they have to find a place to live. We need something to happen to cause that character to go off on their own story. All right? And that is when we begin the escalation for Act 2. Over here, we make sure that we have introduced the villain. We've introduced what the problem is, that thing that the reader's going, oh no. This in your mind, you're going, I wonder if this is going to happen, or maybe this is going to happen. And if you can get your reader wondering about those things, you have accomplished a great deal. And we are done, introductions complete, so we are not introducing much in the way of any new characters in the meat and potatoes of the story, unless it's just a very minor character that flits in and out of the story. So that's Act 1. Act 2. This is the meat and potatoes of your story. It's the cream filling in the middle of the Twinkie, all right? We have escalation throughout for your character. We have in the external plot, which is the story that's going on, right? We have the main story engaged. This is the heart of the story. And then all is ready for the final push. Now, if you have in your brain, and you've probably jotted down several pages in a notebook somewhere, what your story is about, most likely you have a lot of this already figured out. What I want to say is there is a very good possibility that you've thought a little bit about how to start your story, a little bit about how to end your story, but most of your thinking centers around what happens in Act 2. Okay? So I want to tell you that there are things in Act 2 that need to happen very importantly. We need escalation throughout. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. And now let's look at Act 3. We have our inner journey continues. We're ready for the final push. It's the beginning of the end. And any movie you watch, usually you know when you get there. You get to Act 3. Because all of a sudden you're like, well, it's going to end this way or it's going to end this way. But you keep watching the movie because you want to find out which way it's going to go, don't you? Okay? So that's what happens in Act 3. Act 3 is just the natural falling off of the story. Okay? We have the moment of truth for your protagonist. In other words, you are testing them right now. You have to make them make a decision. And we're going to find out, did they really change? Through all that escalation, did they really change? What they do in that moment of truth is going to show us that they really did learn something, they really did change, or they didn't. So that's very important. We have the climactic moment, which is very close to the moment of truth in your story. This is where the horse and rider fall over the cliff. This is where somebody decides to shoot somebody, or it's where, you know, something happens. Somebody ends up in the hospital and then and they flatline on the operating table. Whatever happens, that climactic moment. And then we have the falling away action and the final state. Consider starting your story with Act 2. Think about any great movie you have ever seen. There's that glorious middle part where you don't want to, you know, pause. You don't want to do anything. You just want to keep watching. That is Act 2. So think about that. You know, any great movie that you've watched, like Star Wars, where they've got the Death Star and then they're trapped at the Death Star and things like that. Any great movie where you've got all the fun stuff happening. This is what is happening in Act 2. And before, though, you can have that really great meat and potatoes that you probably already have in your head. You have to have, for example, in Star Wars, you have to have Luke and Han trapped in the Death Star while trying to save the princess. So what is the setup? What do we have to do? In Star Trek, we have to know what is the Death Star. We have to meet Han and Luke. We have to motivate them to somehow help the princess. And then we have to get them together. So a lot of, now this is part of my favorite thing about, I don't like making decisions about stuff, but I like it when I've got a good story and I know for sure I want these things to happen in the story. I almost always, I have some big conflict, some big dangerous thing that has to happen, and I also have to have somebody die that you just endeared yourself to. So I have these little things that I always want to have happen, and I know that's going to happen in the middle. But in order to get all my characters in place, Act 1 is where I have to think, how am I going to get them in place for everything to happen in the main part of the story, the heart of the story. It's easy. Once we know what's in Act 2, it's easy to create Act 1. And Act 2 cannot last forever. The story is not complete with a falling off of the action. A transformation of your character, like I talked about, is really great, but unless it's tested by fire in that moment of truth, we don't know that it's really happened or not. And we need to know that the reader deserves to see characters he cares about feeling relief and hope and happiness. That's called a catharsis, when you have that relief. Even if you're a pantser. Do you see how I've got the inner journey and the external, right? I wrote up here what the internal, I wrote basically that information, I wrote it at the top of my paper to remind me of what I'm doing. And then I put bullet points of what needs to happen in what order. Now, I don't know how many chapters that's going to take me to get through. That's where the pantser in me comes in. But I do want to know that I've got the correct points in the right order. And then you can see that one's got more stuff on it. Those are just bullet points to tell me what has to happen. Maybe this took me 4, 5, 6 chapters, and maybe this is going to take me 30 chapters. But I know I've got all of my elements in there. And you guys are welcome to look at this. I'm going to leave it up on the table. And then my Act 3, and see, once again, I wrote up here what was here, what I needed to know, what I needed to make sure that I'm covering. And then my Act 3, more bullet points. Please don't think of a 3-act structure as being a third, a third, a third. It's not that at all. In fact, it's typically more like a fourth, half, and a fourth. That's closer to it, really. So you've got that meat and potatoes in your head. Make sure that we've got obstacles. I was attending a conference 2 weeks ago, and one gal explained her story arc like this, and I thought it was really great. So let's see, I need to go from this way to this way. So she said that your character is coming, and you got things going on in your story. It's going up, and you just feel like, oh, I can end the story. I've got an easy shot to the end of the story, but no, you, the writer, put a wall there. Make it so that your protagonist has a problem, a big problem, because conflict is what makes a good book. Okay, a good story has conflict. So put a wall up. Something happens, and now your protagonist cannot get to the happy ending. So they have to make a decision. And that decision is going to cause that story to go up, 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 and then boom, another wall. Just when you, the reader, think that you know how it's going to end. Oh no, the villain really is alive. He's not dead after all. You know, something has to happen. And so think of it as you are walking through your story arc, okay? You want to give it conflict, conflict, conflict. In the beginning, this is the normal, we'll say it's a girl, it's the woman's normal state. This is where she's at. She has heart's desires, but she has a secret hurt, and we slowly find that out as we trickle in backstory like salt and pepper, right? We have everybody introduced in the beginning, and then there is that decision that she has to make. Something happens. The house burns down, and her whole family is dead. Now what does she do with her life, okay? And so we start the real story, the escalation. And maybe you have introduced a villain. Maybe that villain wants to marry her, and he's the one that set the fire because her family, he's psychopath, okay? And he burned the whole house down and he killed her. I'm making all this up as I'm going. He killed her whole family because he wants her. And we meet him and we don't like him, do we? Do you realize that every villain is supposed to have one redeemable characteristic? That's hard sometimes. It really is. But you need to make them have one redeemable. Maybe they're a nice dresser. I don't know. But make them have one redeemable quality. Okay. So you've started your protagonist on this journey. And this journey that they're going on is not fun. But you're putting obstacles in their way. And every time they make a choice and about that obstacle, how they're going to get over it, around it, under it, through it, that changes them. And then another obstacle, and then another obstacle. So conflict, 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 all the way through. And then finally, there's that moment of truth where she has gained so much strength that she has the courage to, whatever, pull the trigger on this villain who she's discovered now has killed her family. And she had already thought she fell in love with him until she found out what he did. You know, who knows what the story could be. But you've got to bring it to that point where the reader is been turning the page, turning the page, turning the page, and things have to happen. Too often, I read a really well-written book one time, and the story arc was like this. I like books with story arcs that go boom, 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 and then give me a nice little ending, but keep me happy, right, at the end. So story arc is so, so important. It's not something you can fix later. It just isn't. So that's why I go over that. And I also want to explain to you that if you've written a novel, you've done your very best, and you've gone to a bigger publisher, and sometimes it's some of the smaller publishers, they have someone look at it, and they go through and they want to do a developmental edit. In fact, before they offer you a contract, they will have a developmental editor go through it to see if it has all of the qualities that it needs. Okay, this book right here, the story grid, anybody familiar with that? It is used by a lot of developmental editors as checkpoints to see, does your story have what it takes to make an engaging novel? Does it, and I'm talking memoirs also, if you want to sell a memoir. Does it have the points required to be an engaging novel? He talks a lot about all the different things that need to be there. If you were to hire a developmental editor, they very well may go through something like this and a whole set of checkpoints to see if you've got what needs to be there. So that is why I wanted to go through the story arc first of all, to see is there any element missing from your story. You may have to add more to it before you start writing. Okay, then go ahead and write by the seat of your pants if you need to. That's just fine. Okay, now we're going to talk about tending to the details of the story. By now you may feel like you're swimming underwater, but that's okay because you're swimming forward and you know where the surface is. Okay, so don't panic or anything yet. I'm hopefully just giving you room for food for thought. And you can go home, take these notes, and do a little bit of homework, and maybe do some more setup or do some more ending work. As we make our way through the story, as I talked about before, which is the stage upon which the plot is paid out, we need to pile on the frustrations. And when it's time to pile on your frustrations, make them believable. You need to go for it. Make them believable for the genre. Make them believable for the setting. nothing worse than reading a book and coming across something that you feel like is contrived. The audience or the reader plopped something in there and you're like, no way, that wouldn't happen, right? Or maybe a character says something that's completely out of character. You don't want that to happen. That's like, oh, my pet peeve. Watching a movie that doesn't end.
Oh, I hate that.
I do too. My husband will attest. The first thing I say is, are you kidding me? That's the end? Are you kidding me? I just wasted the last 90 minutes of my life and I don't have any resolution. That was awful. It was awful. It makes me angry with the writer when that happens. Okay, so anyway, you do need to make sure it's believable. Make sure they're all believable. And make sure that they are believable for the characters. Make sure that these conflicts that you put in are also believable for the circumstances. Think about cascading problems, one problem after another that are related or spring from the same source, like falling dominoes. That's a lot of fun. If you can come up with something that happens, and if this happens, oh, well then this is going to happen, and oh my goodness, if this happens, they're really in hot water. Okay, so think about what can you make happen to cause more conflicts. Make them believable, not just out of the blue, like the roof caved in, you know, something weird. And I have found personally, I will go and take my bullet point story arc to my critique group, and I will brainstorm with them during my 15 minutes of time or whatever. And I get the best ideas. And I've done this with other friends too. You know, you say, well, what if this happened? And then what if this happened? You get with other writers and they will give you all kinds of ideas. Just brainstorm. And if you're like, it could happen, you don't jot it down. Some of them are going to be outlandish. Like there's no way my character is going to do that, you know. But never say never. If you want somebody to do something, make a way for it to happen. Put it together. Make it a way to happen. And I had talked about this in January, but I had a character, a beloved character that I needed to have dead because I was ready for conflict. I was ready for something tear-jerking to happen in the meat and potatoes of the story. And I needed to make sure he was dead. I needed to make it believable. I had to do research. I brainstormed with a few people. And I killed him off in a bad way, but it would have happened back then. Historically speaking, it was very, very believable. I had to drop in and plant some of the circumstances. So you see, I came up with this before I started reading, or it would have been really hard to go back and plant some of the things that happened so that the reader was already curious about this person. So that when he actually was killed because of the circumstances, I didn't blindside the reader. Okay, so ask yourself all these questions when you've got something happening to a character, all right? Make it believable. Do your research, make sure that it makes sense. More on piling on the frustrations. This is what Anita Ager Brooks says. But when you unleash a storm over your character, that storm can lead to breakdowns and breakups and rage and tears and mistakes. A series of frustrations can bring out the best in a character, or it could bring out the worst. And honestly, there's nothing, you know how you can endear someone to your character and then you could have them stumble. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to win every battle. Have them lose some of their battles because that's human. You know, maybe they're trying to quit drinking and all of a sudden they blow it. And then they have that much bigger of a mess to clean up. You know, just think about what do they need to go through, okay? Try piling on the problems and see what your characters do in response. Give them reasons, this is very important, give them reasons to respond the ways you need them to respond. So a lot of times your thinking can go backwards. You're like, in your story, I want my character to do this. Now, how do I get them to do that? All right? If you need this love interest, that you need them to have a fight, what are they going to have a fight about? You're going to have to plant something before we get there. You can't just all of a sudden have them fight about something silly. You know, you've got to think those things through. These are some things that we're going to hopefully avoid by covering some of this stuff today. We want to avoid a saggy middle. You're going to avoid a saggy middle by adding conflict, challenge, conflict, all right? That's what conflict in every chapter, conflict on every page, conflict in every paragraph if you can. All right, because that's what life is made of. Life is one conflict after the other, is it not? Soggy characters. We're going to talk about character preparation in a few minutes. And hopefully, by the time you're done, you will not even think about having soggy characters. We want characters we can relate to, that we can believe in, don't we? Soupy plot. And of course, a soupy plot would be you haven't done your homework and getting enough conflict and change coming about of the main character. That would be a soupy plot. And your critique partner should be able to look at your outline and tell you if it's a soupy plot or not. This is one of the reasons why you create a synopsis to send with your proposal when you're trying to sell a story, because that synopsis will tell them if there's a soupy plot. Okay? And if you have critique partners to work with, and also to be studying, there's books that you can read that help you with this. A lot of craft books out there. I just got 2 new ones at a conference that I haven't even had a chance to look at yet. Lots of good craft books out there. But always learn. Keep learning. Keep learning. Never think that you've arrived. Okay? Let's talk about great hooks and satisfying endings. These are so, so, so important. We need to hook your reader with interesting action that's interesting to the reader. Think of a movie like Indiana Jones or Mission Impossible. How does Indiana Jones always start? One of those Indiana Jones movies. Or he's running from 100, man-eating pygmies or something. Yeah. And Mission Impossible, drop from the helicopter, lands on the skis, and boom, he's after the villain. They're giving you a taste of what's to come. And that's what you really need to give your reader a taste. If your beginning is boring, that signals to them they might as well put the book down now. Okay? Now, it doesn't mean that you have to have, white-knuckled action going on. But it needs to be of interest. And you need to give them an idea of what's going to happen, what's coming up. You don't have long to grab the reader's attention, so you want your first 2 sentences to be irresistibly compelling. I know people that have told me that they already know their first 2 sentences. It's like somehow that came to them, and that's what it's going to be. But honestly, most novelists go back and change their beginning pages over and over again, because they know by the time you finish the book, you've got a better idea of how you want to invite the reader into your story. So it's a lot of fun that way. And then plus you're developing your craft, which isn't going to be beautiful on your first time through. Get your reader invested in someone, either by having her relate to the heroine or admire the hero. You have to make the reader or the agent or the editor care enough to turn the page. I had my first book written. I met with a mentor at a conference. She was one of my favorite authors. I'd read like 20 of her books. And she invited us to give her our first 5 pages, which she looked at before the conference. And she looked at mine and she said, "Your writing is wonderful." She says, "But I need more reason to care about this poor girl. Give me some reason to care about this girl." And I came up with 2 sentences to make you care about that girl. I planted that in 48 hours something was going to happen to change her life. But I didn't say it like that. I did it from her deep POV, 48 hours, and she'd have her answer. And then I said something about something happening internally. But that's all I needed. And that made you turn the page, because you're like, what's going to happen in 48 hours, right? So you need to be thinking about that. Do not start with a dream. That's kind of like a bait and switch for your reader. You start with this incredible dream, and then they realize, oh, it's just a dream. I guess the book isn't going to be that good after all, because the rest of the book isn't going to be a dream, is it? So don't start with a dream. Do not have someone getting out of the car. Very cliche. Do not start at some mundane beginning. Do not give us backstory. This is a novice novelist's biggest nightmare. We think, oh, but the people have to know this and this and this and this about the character or about the situation. But guess what? The this and this and this that you think they have to know right now, it's okay for you to give it to them in little spoonfuls throughout the story. And that's the way it should be done. Even not spoonfuls, sprinkling like salt and pepper, seasoned. Okay? And no backstory for like 5 pages. Get us involved with the story itself, the plot that's going on, and the character. Okay? So we don't want to ever also overset the scene. Overset the scene. Don't spend the, let's say you have 4 sentences in your first paragraph. Do not make 3 of those telling me what color the wallpaper is and what color the carpeting is. Don't spend so much time talking about the weather that I'm wondering if the book is about the weather. Okay? Think reader first. Always think the reader. What does the reader want to know right off the bat? They want to know what's at stake, who's my character, do I care about them? That's what they want to know. And they also want you to give them a taste. Do not start the story with the heroine sitting and thinking about what's wrong with her life. Don't tell what's wrong, show it. If she has a psycho ex-boyfriend who won't leave her alone, don't start the story with her crying about it on the front porch swing. Start the story with the doorbell ringing. Now, I have heard this said many, many, many times. When I've sat and I've listened to panels of agents and editors, they said almost inevitably when they get a novel, a story, a manuscript from a first-time novelist, one of the things that happens is they feel like the person started 3 chapters too soon. In other words, where they finally got interested in the book was about chapter 3. And so that's where that book should have started. Because we tend to think of story like a children's storybook. Once upon a time, there was a girl with 3 wicked stepsisters and a stepmother. And now you're thinking, where was her father? Right? So no, start with her scrubbing the floors and her stepsisters railing on her about something, right? So it's not a once upon a time beginning. It's a dump us into something wonderfully interesting, okay? That's what we need to begin with. Here's the first paragraph of Claimed out of Kensington Brava. She'd die if she jumped, probably with a great deal of pain first. The rotating hum of the helicopter's blades echoed through the confined space of the aircraft as Emma Paulson calculated her odds of a quick death. She'd likely hit a tree or 2 before slamming into the earth. Not good. Now, that's a good beginning. That's a good beginning. Somebody tell me some of the things that you know right off the bat from that first paragraph. Some of the things that you know right off the bat. Okay, she should have never gotten in the helicopter because bad things could probably happen. What do you know about her? I think she's full of adventure. I think she's very brave. I think she's got a lot of moxie. Just her attitude. Look at this. She'd likely hit a tree. Not good. You know what I mean? So she's wondering, she could have a parachute. I mean, she could be jumping with a parachute on purpose. We don't know yet why she's jumping. Okay? It doesn't sound like she's depressed because of her sense of humor coming through here. I don't know. I'm just saying that this is a great beginning, and we know that she's got a lot of attitude. I like her already. I do. I just love her. I like her strength. She's a strong person, and I see that. This would make you keep reading. What about this? Here's another beginning. Clouds gathered across the heavens, thunder rolling, lightning hinting at oncoming strikes. Paul sighed, his thighs clenching the rushing horse. He had a job to do, but would rather be with Sarah. He met her several years ago and hoped to spend the rest of his life convincing her that one time he danced with Susie Jane at the Smith's barn raiser. It was because his mother insisted upon it. His mother, the woman who taught him. Okay, yeah. Well, what's wrong with it? First of all, the first sentence is kind of pretty. It's about the weather. Not the best hook in the world. The paragraph erodes into backstory and then introspection. Not a good beginning whatsoever. I would probably drop this book like a hot potato because I would be afraid that this kind of writing would be through the entire book. And I couldn't handle it. I don't think I could. There are things there that don't need to be in the first paragraph, but they can be dropped in later, can't they? If they're important to the story. Here's a different version. Hoofbeats and painful death pounded behind him. They were getting closer. Paul tightened his thighs on the stallion, running full bore. Ducking his head as branches ripped sharp bark across his face. Faster! He must go faster! If they caught him, his friends would die. His country would fall. Moonlight glinted off a weapon through the trees, and he yanked on the reins. The horse trilled in protest. A shout sounded from a roadblock ahead. They'd found him. Better beginning, rather than the weather and the thinking while he's writing. Because I know that, let's just say this is Paul Revere. I know that he's got a lot on his mind and he is concentrating about what is at stake, isn't he? So that's what makes it so much better. We know that it's a moonlit night, don't we? We know that there are enemy around him, and it makes us ask a lot of questions. Who is Paul? Who is after him? What happens now that they found him? How and why would his friends die? There's a lot of reason to turn the page, isn't there? So that's okay. That's okay. If you come across someone who's critiquing your book and they say, but I want to know this, and I want to know this, and I want to know this, they may not be a good reader of your genre, because part of reading has to do with wanting those questions to be answered. Okay? Do you ever know in the first 5 minutes of a good movie who everybody is and where they're at and why they're there? No, that all comes out later, doesn't it? Okay. That's why it's important to start in the right place and not 3 chapters before. Choose an exciting place, get your reader committed right off the bat. Now let's talk about the end. You want to give the reader a prize. Ancient psychology said that you'll actually feel better if you've been through something emotional. So have a scene that serves as a prize for the reader. Decide early on if you're going to set the story up for sequel. You do need to decide early on for this. And ask yourself, is this a cliffhanger? Are the characters in place for the second book? So those are the things you need to make sure you know before you ever start writing, because it's pretty hard to go back there and plant what needs to be there. If you want repeat fans, give them what they crave, even if it's not all that they crave. Perhaps one protagonist gets what he wants and the other one dies. And I gave this example in January too. I read a book by Kelly Stewart called Like a River from Its Course, and it was about the annihilation of the Ukrainian Jews by Nazis. And there were 3 protagonists. There was a Christian man, a Jewish girl, and a Nazi soldier, young man. So the story follows them all through. You know, like a chapter here, chapter here. And then you know they're going to cross paths at some point. Even if they don't know each other, they cross paths. And it's fascinating because you knew that was going to happen, and you were always wondering how it was going to happen. Make sure you make the end believable. Endings are hard to write. You may rewrite your ending a few times. I've done my ending from different points of view, trying to figure out which is more effective. I want to share with you a daunting quote by fiction editor Beth Hill, which sums up a successful story arc. Fiction writers have to entice and satisfy and lead. They have to reveal and surprise. They have to create not only believable, but the arresting, and deliver it to readers eager to lose themselves in a world far from their own. It's pretty daunting. It's a heavy, heavy assignment for a novelist. We're going to the next section, and we're going to talk about how we can complete our timeline research and character profiles. The timeline of your story. You will always need a timeline, even if your entire book takes place in 24 hours. You're still going to need a timeline to keep everything straight and to have them make sense. And not just the sequence of things happening, but the duration and the overlap. Remember that time crawls forward for each character at the same time. This is a mistake that's often made. If you're thinking about, let's say, we have a fight going on, okay? And we have this person's POV, and they're fighting. And then the next chapter, we have this person in their POV, and they're jumping into the fight. They cannot jump into 5 minutes before we saw the end of the previous chapter. Do you see what I'm saying? You need to make them jump into here and keep the fight going. All right? That's a very common mistake. Time continues on. Unless you're writing a time slip story, that's a whole different ball of wax. You can use a storyboard app. There's also timeline app. There's also a physical timeline. Having taught high school history, I would always have my walls were always lined with big old timelines with butcher paper. And I did that for my first and second book. I did this big timeline, physical timeline, and had all my bullet points, and I typed them up, and I printed them out, and I cut them out, and then I used a glue stick, and I pasted them to my timeline because I'm a visual learner. So if you're a visual learner, I highly recommend that you do some kind of a timeline, either one that's going like this or one that's going like this. For me, it's more effective to go like this. I don't know why. That left to right thing is very helpful for me. but your timeline is important. I have read books where there was a slip up and I caught it immediately, just because that's the way my brain works. So it's very important. You might need a more detailed rendering of your outline. So once you have that outline that I talked about, that maybe just bullet points based on your story arc, you might need to go a little bit more detail with some of those points. If you're with Scrivener, this is what I've done is I order the note cards and then I print them out. And I've got, if you want to look at that at all, I've got that up here. So I won't dwell on that. Let's talk about research for a minute. Now, even if you don't write historical, I remember when I first started writing historical, I'm like, oh, why didn't I decide on contemporary? And then I started talking to some contemporary friends and found out, well, they still had to do a bunch of research too. Not the same kind I did, but they had to do what I had to do what they did, and then I had to do more. But there's still research. There's still research that needs to go on. So you're going to be researching weather. What kind of a weather pattern is it? Let's just say you're writing a book that takes place in New England. You need to know what the climate is. You need to know that, does it snow 6 months out of the year like it does in some states, or does it only snow 3 months out of the year? You need to know what plants are indigenous, and you need to know what they are and how to describe them. The buildings, what kind of buildings are in that place? If you're writing fantasy, you have a whole story world to create, and you still have to make it believable, and you have to do the kind of research that makes it believable. I've come across people in some of my workshops that are writing like techno thrillers. They've got to do a lot of technology research, and they might want a certain kind of weapon, but they can't have that certain kind of weapon if they don't know if it's physically possible, according to the laws of physics, so to speak. Clothing, what kind of clothing are they wearing? You can put these on note cards. You can, for example, I would have one note card that says plants, and I would write down the names of some of the plants, and I would write down some descriptors. So I would pull it up on the internet, and I would find out, okay, let's just say I wanted to talk about some flowers. I wanted to know what indigenous, I write for West Virginia. So in West Virginia, in June, what is flowering? And then not only do I write down the name of it, but I write down what it looks like. So I write down just a few descriptors. So get the facts about the building, the clothing, and plants, and write down some some descriptive words that you can use when you're talking about it. And so all of your plant stuff is on one note card. All of your building stuff is on one, all your clothing stuff. I'm going to show you how I use OneNote in a little bit. Before we take our break, I'm going to pull that up. You might also just find website favorites, save all those websites in there. And another shortcut that you can do as you're going through, if you discover that there was some research that maybe you should have done before you started your first draft, this is what I do. Instead of taking time to look stuff up, I will put, see that bracket? I will put a brace or a bracket, some kind of searchable character in my rough draft as I'm going. So let's say I decide that my characters are going to jump in a boat and go across a lake. I got to know what kind of a boat it is. Is it a flat bottom boat? Is it a V-hull? Is it have a 3 horsepower motor or a 4 horsepower? I don't know enough about boats. So I would put bracket, boat details, in bracket. And then I keep on writing. And then when I'm doing my edits, I'll come across that. I can even search for that bracket and come across and do that nitty-gritty of research while I'm doing my edits. Because that's the time-consuming thing, is the edit. It's not the writing of the story. That is not what the time-consuming part of being a novelist is. Okay? So anyway, that's what I do. It works really, really well. You're going to, as your story unfolds, especially if you're a pantser, you're going to come across places that you don't want to spend the next 20 minutes surfing the web trying to find information. If this is a minor thing that you're really probably only going to write 3 or 4 lines about, put a bracket and put, something, and then keep going. Just keep on going, okay? All right, let's talk about character profiles. These are the things you want to know before you start writing. You want to know about their physical traits. So find a photograph. Find a photograph that looks something like you envision your person looking like. And then write down words that you will use to describe their eyes and their hair. Write down just several words, like maybe they have, red hair. What are all the different ways you could say the word red hair without saying red hair, because red hair sounds really boring, right? You could talk about their their hair, and, you know, was it russet, or did it glow in the sun like fire, you know, or did it, you know, whatever. All right, so put down words to go along with their physical traits. Background information. Anything that you can possibly use later to help the reader relate to that individual. Just because you got it down doesn't mean you have to use it. But the more time you spend getting to know your character, the more organically you can help the reader know him. Ask yourself, you know, did her papa used to smoke a certain kind of tobacco? And then the character has reactions that are associated with that memory, and it makes it more powerful. So come up with a backstory, even if you don't think you're going to use it. Come up with something that you can pop into the story to make the person more relatable. Habitat. Where do they live? Where's all this stuff going on? Find a photo of the house or the yard or the bedroom. Decide what type of wall covering, paint color there is. What kind of furniture is it? Find photos or descriptions of period pieces of furniture. If maybe it's an old woman and she has old furniture, well, tell us what it looks like, you know. Does the dwelling match the lifestyle of the character? If they're impoverished, don't have them living in a nice brick brownstone, you know what I mean? Don't forget to think about smells as we're going through. Smells are so important, and sometimes you need to do a little research on those to find out the smells. Personality traits. If you want your reader to connect with your character, don't skimp on developing this. I have known writers that actually take personality tests for their readers, for their characters. They actually do a personality test trying to be their character. And that's always really interesting. You know, I haven't gone that far yet, but I did do this. Some of you have the emotion thesaurus. There's all kinds of thesauruses you can order. Amazon has them all. This one is called the Positive Trait Thesaurus. I bought this when I started doing my third book, and I realized that I didn't really know my protagonist. The hero of my story. He was a very, very secondary family member character in book 1 and book 2. But by book 3, he was a grown man, and I felt like I didn't know him. What had become of him? You know, what was important to him? What were his characteristics, his traits? What was his downfall, his weak spots? Anyway, this book really helped me a lot because I don't have any trouble coming up with negative traits, but I have trouble coming up with positive traits. And I did not want to imitate what I'd already used for his siblings. You know, I needed to make him a character. Relationship. There's secondary characters that you need to develop too. Not just the names of their uncles and aunts and their neighbors and so forth, but what is their relationship like with those people? And if you don't think it's important now, you may be later thinking you'll have it and you can use it. For example, what if they have a crotchety neighbor? It's always nice to have a crotchety neighbor to throw in there. And just like it's always nice if your protagonist has like a friend that they can bounce stuff off of, always good for them to have somebody to talk to because that's a good way to get information to your reader, and it can also be the source of more conflict. What if all of a sudden they're not talking to each other, or one hurts the other, or lies to the other, or something happens, okay? So having a friend is important. Knowing what the relationships with other people is like. So having this information is very important, and a very important part is their secret pain. What is there in their life that makes them have the weakness that they have? You know, Dorothy, she was insecure in The Wizard of Oz. Why was she insecure? Did you see her mom or dad in the picture? Yeah, she was raised by Auntie M, right? Auntie M, right? So maybe that was part of her insecurity is she grew up without a mom and dad, or who knows, maybe she lost her mom and dad at a very formative age. But there's something, that secret pain. Maybe they wanted a family, all they ever wanted to do was have a family, and she can't have children. You know, so this is also, that's the last important thing that you need on these character profiles. We're going on to the next part, prepare. How can we prepare for this 30 days ablaze? What do you need to do to make your workspace agreeable for you for the next 30 days? Everybody's got a different workspace. So ask yourself, do I need to take out the trash? Do I need to catch up on the filing so I get these piles gone in my office? Do I need to put away clutter? Do I need to make the spare bed? I have a spare bedroom. That's where all the grandkids sleep when they come to visit, and anybody that visits. Do you need to create a do not disturb sign or put a water dish in there for the dog so the dog's not constantly bothering you? My dog gets really lonely when I'm writing, and she comes in and lays on the second bed. Every afternoon, she's in there. She can't jump up by herself. She's a 14-year-old dachshund, and she can't get up there, so I have to stop what I'm doing, put her blanket on the bed, pick her up, and then she's planted there for at least the next 4 hours. So ask yourself, what is it you have to do? Whatever is distracting about your creative cave needs to be set aside, out of sight, out of mind. What will make your space pleasant? I love it when I have a bouquet of flowers on my desk. If my eyes can look, I have 3 things that I make sure that I have when I'm really working hard that make things just delightful for me. 1 is a bouquet of flowers. 2 is a candle burning, and it has to be Yankee Candle, Home Sweet Home. And thirdly, I have a bird feeder for songbirds right outside my window, and I make sure it's full. Because there's something, it doesn't distract me, it feeds me to have those birds there. It just puts me in such a good mood. So what is there that you need in your environment to make it work for you? The second thing is schedule. What about your schedule? You need to set a schedule that you can stick to while you're writing your book. Preferably the same hours each day, but that's not always possible. If there's an event coming up, set your schedule around it now, not when it happens. Treat your writing like a job that someone's paying you to do. You clock in and you clock out with no wasted time. And when you hit your word count, you can either knock off and reward yourself, or you can just continue going on. I had a word count every day of 3,000 words, and I would sometimes go up to 6,000 words just because I was in the groove. And if you're in the groove, try not to let anything stop you. And we're going to talk about boundaries in a minute too. Okay, another topic that you might not have thought about is family. You may need to put your family on notice. Have a family meeting and make sure that they know that this is not an impulse thing or just a I want to do it, but that it's a commitment. It's something that you are going to do. It is a commitment. Ask them to facilitate your commitment by taking phone calls for you or answering the door or preparing meals. Now, I know that some of this doesn't apply to some of you, so take what you can use and just glean with it, glean from it. Tell your family how they can help you. Do they need to take on extra chores or responsibilities during this time in order to make this happen? It's only for a month. You can do it and they can do it. Prep for success. Plan easy meals, snack drinks, just for you and enough for the month. So make sure you have your supply. I have one author friend, she's written 6 books that have done really well. Her favorite snack is apples and peanut butter. And that's her go-to. She cuts her wedges of apples and she dips it in peanut butter. I personally like celery and peanut butter a lot. So whatever there is, you might want to try to not do too high of a sugar because you don't want to get weary. You don't want your sugar to dip while you're writing. Save that for when you're done. Or at the end of each day, you can reward yourself or whatever. We have a joke in our house. My husband is really good about going, oh, you don't need to make supper. I'll just open up a can of chili when I'm writing, and he knows I've got along. He knows I'm in there 12 hours a day and I'm getting stuff. And so that's the big joke. He does not mind, and he doesn't even heat it up. He eats it out of the can like a bachelor. Anyway, so the first award speech that I wrote, and I wasn't in Nashville to accept the award, so another agent in my literary agency was there, and she accepted it on my behalf. And so I had to write a speech. And in the speech it said, and thank you to my sweet husband, Kevin, for his love of canned chili. Do you know that while that was going on, he was eating chili? Yes. The chili was dumped on top of nachos, but he was eating chili. And he just started laughing. And so the next time, just a month ago, I was up for that same award with a different book. And he's like, are you up yet? Is it time yet? I said, no, it's going to be to my category here pretty quick. He goes, let me go open a can of chili. I go, are you kidding me? He goes, no, I need to. It's tradition. So he did. He sat there and ate chili. He goes, you're going to win. He's eating, and I did. I won, and he was eating the chili. And anyway, I think I said it in my speech again about him eating canned chili, and it was, so I don't know. It's a magic formula. So I don't, if you have a husband, get him eating canned chili, and you'll win awards. Strategies, some things you might think about. Plan ahead for interruptions because they will come. What will you tell your friends when they call you and want to talk and go out and so forth? Will you answer the phone? if it is not from immediate family? Who will you let know you are unavailable for the next month? What do you need to do to clear your calendar or back away from previous commitments? It's only for a month. Like I would have to cancel my first and third Tuesday night bluegrass jam with my fiddle. I was just for that month, I wouldn't go because I know I'm probably not going to be hitting my word count and then turn around and be able to go and fiddle for 2 hours. So you got to make those decisions and ask yourself what to do. Now, we're going to talk about this in boundaries a little bit. On the NaNoWriMo website, they tell you to tell everybody that you're doing it. This is my experience. The fewer people that know you're doing it, the better. Because some of you are nodding. They bug you. They call you, how's the book coming? How's the book coming? Or they'll show up at your house with something. Here's some brain food for you. I'll just stay for a little bit. And they've interrupted you for an hour. Or they're constantly, when do I get to read it? Can I read part of it? They just bug you. And they don't understand that this is a very, very concentrated discipline that you are undertaking. And it takes a lot out of you. Emotionally, mentally, and physically. It really does. Okay. Now I'm going to show you my OneNote. How many of you have OneNote on your computer? Most people, if you have Word, you have OneNote. This is my OneNote, and I just wanted, for my first novel, I do a lot of research with note cards. But here, for example, if I click on this tab, this is not there. Medicine, 1860s, I have a doctor. So I had to do a lot of research about medicines. Here's a link I could click on to go to very easily. And this is a bunch of stuff in the general hospital back then, what they did for it, botanicals that were used. I have all this research at my fingertips. Here's a bunch of things that they used back then. A cataplasm is a poultice. A doctor might say that word if he's talking to another doctor. If he's talking to a person that's not a doctor, he might say poultice, right? A canker, they use that word a lot. I mean, I remember always having canker sores, right? What's camp fever? Typhus is camp fever. Okay, so I had to know about 1860s and what they were doing. Here is a category here. There, do you see that? I have a page, a tab for all these things. All these different things, all the different regiments I had to use, the different battles in West Virginia, cooking, outside cooking in the camp in the 1800s, miscellaneous photos and information, hair descriptors. That's a nice one. Look at this. This is all cut and paste from website. All these words to describe hair. Dirty, dirty blonde, downy, dreadlocks, ducktail, French knot, hairpiece, mane, messy, ringlets, rubber, bands, skinhead, ratty, raven, pixie plate, all kinds. Here's words, different words. How many words can I use for my blonde-haired person, right? I could say she's auburn, copper, flaming, whatever. How many browns? How many words can I use to describe brown? So that's what I'm saying. If you get these things at your fingertips, you can pull them up and use them. And I would use these to put on my character card for my character profile. I would pick which words am I going to choose. Like my gal, I'm not going to call her Strawberry Blonde, but if she's in the sunlight, we could say flaming. I could say copper, auburn. I don't like the word auburn. I don't know why. My mother always used that word. She'd go, "Oh, you're auburn hair." I'm like, "Mom." Anyway, all these different colors for blonde. It's just wonderful. But these are all from websites. Let me show you the characters. Here, characters. Okay. So, there's my house. We were talking about setting. There's my house. And here's my descriptor. Whoops, I skipped. There was a bunch of descriptors underneath it. And this is a real, George Patton, you mostly know that from a general in World War II. His grandpa is in my book. Okay, his grandpa was a Civil War general eventually, but he was a colonel in my book. And anyway, that's what he really looked like. So as a young man, I had to say what he looked like because he's in my book. This is to help me with one of my characters. That was one of my main characters. And that was another one. He looks a lot like my son. My son has this big, full red beard. And anyway, but I had, and my maiden name is McLaughlin, so I named him Seamus McLaughlin. He's a secondary character in one of my books. And, but I needed something to look like him. There's old Izzy's. Izzy is the one that I had to kill, and we loved him very much. There's the house with all the descriptors written below it, okay? And I decided there was a shingle hanging there and what the shingle said on it. That's the main character, the protagonist. Do you see how I wrote down here? Eyes, brown, hair, ash, color of cold ashes, silver and gold mixed. His beard was brown, chestnut, russet, age 28. This is where he was from. He has burn wounds. Where did he have burn wounds? The left side of his face, near his eye, down his jawline, left arm. These are things I had to remember because he shows up in other books. And I need to know, wait a minute, he got burned really bad. Now, which leg has a really bad burn wounds on it? You know, or which eye had the patch over it. And so these are things I need to remember about the characters. There's my horse. I had to know exactly what a chestnut roan gelding looked like. Okay, so that I could describe him constantly. So I can't tell you the importance enough of doing your research and knowing what everybody looks like. You might think, here's skin colors. I had people of color. So here's a website that gives you a writer, all kinds of good colors to use for skin tones. And if you need any helps like that at all, you can just go online and if you Google skin tone for writers, if you say for writers, people have compiled lots and lots of lists out there for writers. Hair, color, tone, texture, skin, colors of eyes, all that stuff, okay? I have really looked hard to find a good timeline program online that I could just plug stuff into, and I have not been able to find it. It has not been flexible enough for me or allowed me to write enough information in there. So that's why when I did it from left to right, I would write it out with the dates, and then I would cut them and then paste them onto my butcher paper. And for me, as a visual learner, it was a big help. And this is from Scrivener, so all I had to do was tell it to print my cards out. Each card was an event, so that it happened. I just got done reading a fantastic book. It was a 2-book series, and the main character was a deaf mute, but he knew sign language, and this was back in the 1880s. It was wonderful. She explained at the very beginning how she decided she was going to do it, and so she alludes to certain sign language maneuvers, you know, like fingers to the chin for water, you know, and stuff like that. So that's what she did, and he always had someone around him, almost always had somebody around him that could read the sign language, or he kept a pencil and paper in his pocket, so he was always writing stuff. But she did an exquisite job. I thought, well, this is going to be challenging. He can't hear and he can't speak. And she did a wonderful job of it, and she introduced in the very beginning and said what she was going to do, so people would know. So I can tell you what those books are if you're ever interested. So, okay, well, let's take about a 10-minute break, and then we will jump back into this.